Welcome to episode 18. How do I cope with disappointment?
You weren't the one ruined my day now. I feel like crying. For me, the fear of disappointment is something that actually stops me from progressing.
I've got to first of all deal with the pride, and which again, I think probably is at the root of a lot of disappointment.
The principle is still the same about cultivating the right beliefs, because otherwise that disappointment will take you out.
Disappointment usually that becomes hidden turns into something destructive in our lives. When the dung of disappointment drops, we can spread it and it becomes our conviction. Well, this is what I don't want, and this is what I do want. Welcome to episode 18 of The Winning Life with me, Gareth Morgan.
And I'm Leanne Morgan.
And we welcome you to another episode. This might be your first episode, and if it is, you're so welcome. There's so much here on our channel that you can watch and go back and glean information, wisdom, inspiration, and join in the conversation. And on the podcast platform where maybe you'll be listening to this, again, you can go back and listen to previous episodes. But we are excited about a new conversation today because I know that what we've got to talk about affects everyone, and it affects everyone in a really impactful way. So I really think this is going to help people today, Leanne.
Yeah, I definitely do. It's something that does affect everybody without question, without exception. It affects everyone. And do you want me to read the question out, or shall we go around?
Well, let me ask you a question before we get, which is a lead up. Okay, a lead up. Okay, so have you ever had high expectations for something and then that something or someone didn't meet your expectations? Now, I you can't use me as an example because I've probably done that a million times.
You've exceeded my expectations. You are certainly not a disappointment. Yes, obviously, lots of times from trivial things to kind of quite big things. I'm just trying to think off the top of my head. But yeah, I think there's been many times where, and there's that gap, isn't there, between your expectation and reality always. Sometimes things exceed that and they're much better than you plan. But very often you'll go into something and, your expectation is here, but actually the reality is somewhere quite further down, and there's that gap between expectation and the reality that we call disappointment.
Well, one of the most recent memories, and just looking at home now, that I remember is when I can't remember which of our children it was, and it might have happened to two of them, where we've bought a gift and it may have even been something that they asked for, but actually when they got it, just the look on their face and the response, even though they were trying to say, yes, it's great, yes, it's lovely, like there was no convincing us that this had not met their expectation. That was
really that particular birthday. I think it's Ruben was the most.
I think it was. I wasn't going to mention him, but
no. Well, there we go. Not in really recent times, but obviously
we've all been there. Let's face it. Whether we've been able to hide it or not.
That was awful though, because I hate disappointment in our kids, particularly when it's a gift that you've bought them. And like you said, he'd asked for it, but when he had it, it didn't quite meet the expectation. It wasn't quite what he was expecting. And it's horrible when you're watching their face and you're waiting for oh yes, thank you. And it's like it's measured. Oh, it's breaking my heart to even talk about it.
I've triggered her now. I've triggered her now. It doesn't take much to trigger Leanne's emotions. She's an empathic person. So
and actually it's happened. So then the Christmas after that.
Oh my word, we've started. This is a counselling session. Yeah. People, we've pulled out all the.
Then the Christmas after that, if you remember, our youngest daughter, Bethan, she'd asked for this necklace.
Yeah.
And it was the very first Christmas present I bought that year. And I stowed it away somewhere so carefully. To this day, I don't know where it is. But that was one of her main presents. And when it came to Christmas morning, we were like going, yeah. And then she'd opened everything and she could see this look of disappointment. And she went, I actually can't talk about it anymore.
Yeah.
It's awful.
Well, trust me,
You've
you weren't the one
absolutely ruined
spending
my day now. I feel like crying.
Well, you weren't the one spending, I think it must have been upwards of 2.5 hours on Christmas morning in the bins.
Yeah, in the bins.
Because we were convinced it must have been thrown away with the paper.
Wardrobes. It's obviously been thrown away.
Well, notice what you just did, because this is now the link to
Don't want to talk about it anymore.
This is now the link to the question, people. Okay, we are quite actively demonstrating the question to you, which is, how do I cope with disappointment? And Leanne, your reaction right there, which
not very well, clearly.
No, I've got to be honest. We all have done at some point. Which is to do what? What do we do when that disappointment, or even recollecting on a disappointment, because it may not even be at the time, it could be looking back. What you just said.
Can't talk about it anymore. I want total avoidance of the feeling. I don't want to remember the memory. In fact, and there's another situation which I won't talk about because probably will end up crying. But
we don't. We
could do without that, couldn't we? But in each of those situations, I was like desperately trying to make it up. And I've tried to make that the memory because it's too painful and upsetting. I'm just going to go get tissue.
So, I think there's something that happens in us, isn't there, with disappointment that, again, is not only emotional, but it does connect to our beliefs. So we know when we talk about in the book, The Winning Conversation and The Winning Keys, we talk about the fact that we're made up of these 4 layers: spiritual, emotional, mental, and physical. Disappointment obviously affects the emotional. But I think when you talk about the fact that we naturally avoid anything that evokes memories of disappointment or taking part in something that is linked to a previous failure, and therefore, we avoid that activity.
Yeah, exactly.
We avoid setting that goal. We avoid setting ourselves, in our belief, up to fail, because that's what I saw myself do last time. So therefore, that's what's going to happen next time. What we're talking about there is actually what I believe.
Yeah.
What I believe about the thing, what I believe about the activity, and what I believe about myself in relation to that. So I think what we're talking about here is something that is highly emotive, but actually it reveals something that we believe in our spirit. And Leanne, for people listening and watching right now, how important is it? Let's just go to that belief first of all. How important is it for us not to avoid our beliefs and unpacking what we really truly believe?
Well, it's detrimental ultimately because even with disappointment, if I haven't cultivated the correct beliefs around not just that situation but just generally in life and who I am and my faith and all of those things, then how I view disappointment could actually define me when actually it shouldn't. And we can come on to that in a little while, but that's how important it is, because I think whatever we're getting on with in life, we will face disappointment. I know this is a really cheery message, isn't it, today?
We're climbing a hill. We're climbing a hill. People, stay with us. We're climbing a hill. We will get to the top.
Facing fact. That's all I'm doing, is stating fact that we will face disappointment right through. People let us down. Situations will disappoint us because we're all fallen, imperfect people in a fallen and imperfect world. So disappointment is inevitable, but what we can do is, like we were saying, cultivate the correct beliefs about everything else so that it's on this backdrop. So you have disappointment as a kind of single occurrence, but it's on this backdrop, this canvas of good belief and right belief, so that when disappointment comes, that doesn't become the backdrop for everything on your life, because that's difficult. Because for me, the fear of disappointment is something that actually stops me from progressing and going forward. We talked about this in the MVP Monday. You can go back and listen to that one from the 26th or 27th of February. But we talked about, what is the thing that is kind of your giant? And for me, it's that fear of disappointment, because I don't want to feel those feelings again. So it will stop me from pushing through. You see, in that moment, I know that I haven't cultivated the correct belief, which is, it isn't always going to be disappointing. And if it does turn out to not be the way you expected it, that doesn't mean it's the end.
Yes.
And I think that's the thing, is that sometimes, particularly if you are a highly emotive person like myself, who very often can be led by emotion, that's where disappointment can be a very strong emotion that you try to avoid. So you'll do everything to kind of skirt around that. But a right belief, when we've cultivated that, and a correct belief, will mean that we can go through that no matter what the outcome is.
And I think what disappointment reveals, as you just said there, is a gap. It's a gap, and it's a gap that we can't avoid. And MVPs, people who want to grow, who recognize that they have a duty to deliver their very best to this world, a God-given responsibility to deliver that, then we don't avoid gaps. We go in search of them to unpack what those gaps are. I often talk about the fact that gaps should become our growth action plans. In other words, we need to study those gaps and understand, okay, how do I remove this lid? Because this lid is keeping growth back. And I think when it comes to disappointment, I know for me, I will often have high expectations over, let's say, if I'm delivering something to a group of people. So I might have studied, prepared a session, teaching or communicating. It could have activities. And I'll have in my mind this expectation of the effect or impact that this is going to have. And at the end of that, I, more often than not as a perfectionist, will have fallen short of that expectation. And the gap between that expectation and how I'm feeling is something that I naturally want to avoid. So I'll even, and I'll be brutally honest, I'll avoid talking to people about the session afterwards in case they say something that reinforces the fact that it wasn't good enough. Or they don't say anything about the session, which to me, silence is saying something.
Yeah.
Again, it's pure speculation, because, I'm guessing. But this is what happens. We're complicated beings, aren't we?
We are very complicated.
But that I can avoid that gap, and therefore avoid feedback. But what I've got to do there is I've got to really understand, well, why do I have that? And actually, straight off the bat, that gap reveals to me pride. Because actually, if the session was all about the people, and in that moment, all I'm bothered about is how I feel about how I did. Notice, I.
Yeah.
And so, now, again, I'm not saying we don't unpack things to look and get better. In fact, I am saying that. But I've got to first of all deal with the pride, and which again, I think probably is at the root of a lot of disappointment.
Yeah, because there are some things that happen to us that we are disappointed about, that are out of our control, and that's a different kind of thing that we kind of have to deal with. And I'm not trivializing it, because there are some people who've faced huge disappointment, heartbreaking disappointment. But when we're talking about just purely looking at something I've done and it didn't work out on that level of disappointment, absolutely. We have to be careful it doesn't become about me, myself and I, that it's the one show and it's this one. It has to, we have to throw it wider than that and come from a different perspective. But I think when people face real heartbreaking disappointment, it's still important that the principle is still the same about cultivating the right beliefs, because otherwise that disappointment will take you out.
Yes.
That disappointment will be the one thing that will be the roadblock where it says your journey ends here. But actually, there's so much more. There's a whole journey ahead, and it'll be, I believe, even greater, sometimes because of that disappointment. Yeah. Because disappointment often reveals what's most important to us. So, that's so true. When I talk about the children and, the fact that they didn't get the correct presents or any the present at all because it went missing. Why do I remember that with such heartbreak? Because for me, one of my values is family. And I have worked very hard over the years since we decided to have children. I would always make celebration and Christmas and birthdays a big deal. I wanted them to have those memories. So for me, now they might not even, I think they will remember it quite vividly, but they may not remember every detail. I will remember more because my value is family, and therefore it's revealed what's important about me. For somebody else, that isn't a big deal. We'll just go, well, that wasn't a big thing. But it's revealing what's important to me, whether that be good or equally bad. So if I'm disappointment over something reveals a wrong heart, we need to learn from those things.
In every episode of the Winning Life podcast, you will hear Gareth and Leanne talk about the importance of getting a plan for your personal and professional life. That's why they have developed the MVP plan. When you develop your MVP plan, surprising opportunities and uncommon results follow. The MVP plan provides you with a clear structure to begin to see how your goals can turn into reality. Starting out with setting the goals, highlighting milestones, and planning individual tasks, you'll begin to see how the MVP plan is key to experiencing the results you've always wanted to have in order to make an impact in this world. Visit thewinninglife.tv today to get access to your plan and the steps on how to use it.
And you're right, there are definitely there are probably more than two, but obviously two disappointments, something related to what I do, something related to what has happened to me. And I think regardless of either, the Bible reveals to us, and Psalms is a book in the Bible which is a brutally honest reflection of human nature and our conversation with God and our Maker in that brutal conversation. One of the things I love about Psalms is it contains laments. And lament is quite literally a processing of things such as disappointment. So something happens to somebody and you'll get the psalmist, in other words, the person that wrote that song, and they will be talking about how they feel in that moment. But here's what's really important. I think everybody can experience disappointment. And again, I'm brutally honest, there are people that have stories that make anything that I would share on this subject seem completely insignificant. So I'm completely aware of that. But everybody can experience disappointment, and it's okay to feel disappointed.
I think that's important.
But I don't think it's okay to stay disappointed.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so I think if somebody, we all experience disappointment, and that needs to be processed, not compartmentalized and hidden, because disappointment usually that becomes hidden turns into something destructive in our lives.
Definitely.
So we've got to process it. But the psalmist always goes on this journey from lament, and it ends in praise. It ends in joy, and joy not being just like a feeling of happiness, but a decision to see the situation from a different vantage point. And I love what you said earlier, Leanne. You said, don't let disappointment define you.
Yeah, and it can, like we said, it could really signal the end of the road for someone. And then people put, metaphorical walls around their heart or their life or their relationships, and they go, no, I'm not allowing that to happen again. Now, it's important that we learn from disappointment. Is there anything I could have done?
Yeah.
Is there anything I could have, worked through, prevented this from happening? It's a learning curve, yes. But let's not allow walls to go up. Let's not, switch off the engine and end the journey because of that one disappointment, because that will be your defining factor, when actually your beliefs need to be the things that define you, to push on, to carry on. And I love hearing stories of people who face disappointment after disappointment, and yet their story is still a success, because that's what actually it drove their beliefs drove them past the disappointments and through the disappointments, and not little things either, really big, huge things. And that's what creates the success of someone's life and the impact of someone's life, when actually, in spite of the disappointments, they've held close to their values and their beliefs and pushed through. And I think what also, just to add to that, purely as my faith is in Jesus, and it's important to understand that he will never disappoint us. So my disappointment might come in the stuff around me, and it's easy, and I've done it. I've wagged my finger at God and said, but you've let me down, this has happened. God hasn't let me down. And I think that's important to understand, that we don't turn this into God has disappointed me, because God cannot disappoint us, because he has got our very best interests at his heart. What he allows to come our way is to shape us and to form us and to hone us and kind of really sharpen us. But we have to realize that the hope that he gives us will not disappoint us.
Yeah, lots of people, and you may be listening right now, and again, I say this not from a point of view of condemning anybody, because again, some people go through the most horrendous situations, and people can live a life in reaction to God. And in reaction to, well, if there is a creator, then why has he allowed this to happen? And, you know, there are some genuine questions that people have that I don't have the answer to, and we don't have the answer to. But, you know, don't live your life in reaction to a disappointment, and don't live your life based around a blame of somebody for the disappointment, even though there could be genuine reasons for why other people have done something to you. But here's the thing with disappointment. I was out walking the other day in the fields nearby our house. They had just dumped a whole load of horse manure.
Nice.
Stinky,
It
steaming
stunk.
horse manure.
That's the joy of living near fields, isn't
Absolutely. And here's the thought that just cropped up. Oh.
Well done. Boom, boom.
Boom, boom. I've got a little sound here for that. There we go. Just had to play that little sound. Maybe it's more of a...
Yeah, it's definitely
more of that. Anyway.
It cropped up.
Yeah. And so the thought came to me, when the dung of disappointment drops, spread it on the field.
Nice.
Now, the reason I say that is because, of course... because we walked past it with Ruben, and I said, could you, because it was a huge mound, and I thought, what size horse would need to drop that in one? I don't know why I thought that. Again, most normal people never.
You realise that's not one horse amount
Of course.
Was this just one of those boy questions that you have in your head that girls probably just never come up with?
Yeah, it was one of those crazy. It probably could be analysed by somebody right now. So, but again, it didn't just happen. There was a purpose for them putting it there, because that manure, which others would look at and think is a mess and is unusable for anything good, actually helps the field grow.
It, yeah.
And when the dung of disappointment drops, we can spread it, and it becomes our conviction, a conviction about, right, well, this is what I don't want, and this is what I do want. This is who I am, this is who I'm not. And again, that comes back to the fact that disappointment needs to be processed so that it produces conviction. Because your life tomorrow is being shaped by your convictions today. And, you know, there's a verse in Romans chapter 5, and I love it because it talks about this whole process of transformation, okay, especially when we run into challenges. So it says this: we can rejoice too when we run into problems and trials, for we know that they help us develop endurance. It's a bit like, okay, problems and trials, does it feel like they're helping us? No. But this is about belief, not feeling. We know that they help develop endurance. And it says this: endurance develops strength of character, and character strengthens our confident hope of salvation. And this hope will not lead to disappointment. So notice the root out of disappointment is how you respond to disappointment by saying, this is going to help me and not harm me. It is going to promote me in terms of pushing me forward and into the things that I believe that God has for my future, rather than pull me back. And it's that conviction in that moment of disappointment that actually cannot be developed without the disappointment.
Yeah. So we actually can't always try and avoid it. And I think
you need to spread it.
Yeah, and I do think if we actively go out of our way and avoid situations so that we don't get disappointed, we're actually shortchanging ourselves, because who knows, it might not end in disappointment. And I love that. There's almost like a little flow chart that we can work through that. So when you have disappointment and you do the right thing.
You're good with flow charts.
I'd like a good flow chart.
We could do one right now. If we had a flip chart behind us, Leanne could get a marker out and do a flow chart. Let us know in the comments if you want her to do a flow chart on this. Sorry, go on.
No, but it's true. You could have everyone enters disappointment, but then from that you've got two choices. You either give up and that's the end of the road, or it carries on and you go into actually going to develop perseverance or endurance, whichever kind of version you read. Endurance or perseverance. And I'm going to allow this to push me through, because then that leads to character, the development of your character, who you are, who you really are. We're not talking about personality here or what other people think about you. Your true character, it develops who you are. And that character leads to hope. It kind of strengthens our hope. And that hope, which is in Christ and Jesus, will not disappoint us. And I love that. That has been a verse that I've read so many times when I've gone through difficult times. That actually, what do I do with this? It's got to propel me into something better. It cannot allow me to shrink into something lesser just because I want to avoid the feeling.
And over the years, in leadership particularly, and if you're listening to this, everybody has the ability to lead and has a measure of influence. But I think the greater the responsibility of leadership that is on your shoulders, the greater chance there is for disappointment.
Yeah.
Especially when you lead through people. And of course, we're all imperfect, so people disappoint. Okay?
Yeah.
And so over the years, we've had countless disappointments, and we would have disappointed as well. And, through that process, there has to be something that keeps you going. And I think number one, it's that, ultimately who I really am is being developed.
Yeah.
And that is what lasts, both now and into eternity. But secondly, it's all working together for good. It's all going to build up into a crescendo and a climax of victory. In other words, a positive outcome, provided that I keep allowing it to process it. Yes, feel the disappointment. Don't compartmentalize it, but don't stay there either. Discipline your disappointment. Tell your disappointment, this is what you are going to mean going forwards. Yeah, this is what God says about this disappointment. Again, this is where the Bible is so key, because it's truth that speaks into our speculation. Because let's face it, in any moment, even our disappointment, can be just a perspective. Yeah. We don't know in the next hour what's going to happen. Actually, that could be the best thing that could have happened. But at the moment, it felt like the worst thing. So again, in that moment, we have to recognize that we're in a process. We're in a process. And there's a song that I've been listening to recently a lot, and it's based upon this verse from Galatians 6:9, which says this, and I think this is for somebody listening right now, okay? And let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up.
Yeah.
Don't grow weary of doing good. Disappointment causes weariness. But if you say, do you know what? No, I'm going to discipline my disappointment and I am going to keep on going, then in the end, if you do not give up, the harvest, again, we'll come back to a harvest. There's a harvest theme here, the crop. You will get that harvest, So we know those fields will be harvested, even though right now it looks like a mess has been just dropped there. Okay, but we know the process. That's why we're not looking at it just in a moment of time.
Yeah, no, and that's so good, mate. I like that, what you just said about this is a word for somebody who, today you might be listening to this and you are on the brink of giving up. You are on the edge of just handing in, throwing in the towel. And, I think our very first episode was about quitting, wasn't it? When's the right time to quit? Maybe you want to go back to listen to that. But actually, that is a great kind of encouragement and instruction for someone today. Don't allow your disappointment to cause you to give up. Don't allow it to let you become weary when you're doing good, because there is something around the corner. And I think that is the hope, isn't it, that we're talking about, that actually in due season, and I like that, in due season, in time, There's seasons. Right now when we're recording, we're coming into March, and it's hopefully spring is just around the corner. But you can't make that season happen. It has to happen in God's timing and natural, as He's created the seasons to be. We cannot force it. So we have to wait for the next season, and in that next season, it will be there. And I think that's important for us to keep that in our minds, that if we do not give up, we will see what we want to see. And hopefully you know, whoever you are listening to this and you feeling, I want to give up, that you feel encouraged today to go and use that. And it's not that disappointment just disappears overnight. And it's important, like you said, we have to feel sometimes the pain of disappointment in order for us to make the right decision going forward. So don't avoid it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Embrace it and see the good that is coming.
Absolutely. So as we sign off this episode, let us kind of give that final encouragement. There is breakthrough round the corner. There is more in you than you think. Stay the course. Don't give up. We're cheering you on.
Yeah.
Until next time, take care.
Bye for now.
We hope that you enjoyed that episode. And if you enjoyed it, please go and subscribe over on all of our channels on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook, and not forgetting your favorite podcast platform. And if you head over to thewinninglife.tv, you'll be able to find all the resources available to you. Gareth has written several books which will help you on your discovery to building stronger and better lives. Come and join us for the next episode.